It's one giant oversized check, which we actually used as the tent for our fintech stage. What a week. Summer's over, and so are slow news days. Elevate took place this week, and BetaKit was focused on the two stages it was programming for the festival, AI and fintech. So of course, story after story had to emerge. Sounds like we need another AMA episode. Joining me as always is co-host Rob Kennedy, and boy oh boy did our listeners really lean into the Ask Anything component of the AMA. So let's dig in. Rob, we've got questions after questions here. Do you want to get started and we'll see if we can survive this pod?
This is the like shortest and deepest questions I think I've ever seen. It's like 4 words, go, what is the meaning of life kinds of questions. So the first one we've got here for you, Douglas, you're going to take this, I think. 3 words. Is real done?
Okay. So some context before I try to answer this question. So this question, which we received once again, and I think this is a bit of a summary of a lot of the messages that we received. Noticing that also as we get further into these AMAs, fewer and fewer publicly shared questions and way more in the DMs, which I think is indicative of where the tone and tenor of these AMA episodes are going. Is real done is the question that BetaKit reporters have been asked the most all throughout the summer. BetaKit broke the news this week, depending on when you're hearing this, that Janet Bannister was stepping down as the managing partner of Real Ventures, with co-founder John Stokes replacing her. And as part of that decision, Real Ventures is pausing fundraising. So we've been tracking since 2021, following Janet Bannister's appointment as a managing partner, the difficulties that Real might have been facing with their most recent fund that they've been trying to raise. For a variety of different reasons. You know, a Quebec-based fund that's being run from Toronto that identified new Toronto-based replacements for some of the co-founders and Sylvain Carl, who departed the fund. They had, no real significant exits. And even at that time last year, when we were talking about their portfolio, whether it was Element AI's lackluster exit, if you could call that an exit, Breather, insolvency fueled pivot, Frank and Oak insolvency, Hubba being winded down. And then at that time we were pointing to Clearbank, now Clearco, League, Xanadu, and Majuri. So there's some positivity there, but if you're looking at Clearco as well, they haven't had a very easy summer itself. I think the fundraising pause is really crazy because the story that we have been working on all summer was the question, is real done? For the reason it seemed as though they could not get a new fund closed. We've written a lot about in this current environment how difficult it has been for some funds to close. We've covered a few of them. Most will be, I think, Panache in the early stage space right now. Kind of the only significantly active early stage fund with new capital, although we'll get to that a little bit in the back end. The reason why we'd been asked this so much is that it seemed like there were signals that they were not going to get this fund closed. And it was leading to a lot of open questions for portfolio companies, from other VCs. I've never had more VCs come up to me looking for what I'm hearing in the space. That's a relatively new experience, particularly one relating to an incredibly well-known early stage fund in our ecosystem. But I think it points to the ongoing concerns. And I think there were some other signals. We can dig into this in terms of what exactly Janet Bannister's summer was like. But I think the real concern here, or the signal to us that changed our reporting from a story where we would maybe be posing this question to one where it was kind of answered. This is a fund that hasn't had a founder fuel cohort for a year. We've been told that certain portfolio companies have not been able to get additional financing because they don't have the follow-on capital necessarily. We know specifically of Real Ventures portfolio companies that found out from our story prior to the AGM, possibly at Elevate. That's a bit of a rough look. And I would say Janet's displacement has been a bit of a dramatic surprise to some. But all of this, in my mind, rests around the fundraising, because you can have turnover at firms. We've covered that before. This isn't the first time in Real Ventures. They've replaced exiting partners with new
over the last couple of years, right?
Partners.
Like I've read in BetaKit's stories, it's like this has been a story for quite a while, ongoing, like what's the leadership, what's happening, who's in, who's out.
Yes, but the pausing of the fundraising to me is the most concerning from the perspective of the health of
the fund itself,
the firm, because the way that VCs pay themselves is management fees on the funds that they raised. And they haven't raised a fund since 2017. They told us that they are out of fresh capital. How do they keep the fund going? How do they keep staff without raising a new fund? Now, I think it was an expectation of some that they were going to pause on the fundraising until such time as like the numbers on their companies improved, along with like the rest of Canadian or North American tech companies. But how much time do they have to pause? And what does this pausing signal? Because I'm certain there were LPs that were holding capital in reserve for this fund because Janet was involved. Where do they go?
Is that a segue to the next question?
Well, just as an open question, maybe check me on some of this in terms of when it comes to whether or not we saw this probably most dramatically with 500 Canada, which blew up because of the actions of Dave McClure, but specifically impacted 500 Canada because 500 Canada couldn't raise a new fund because they didn't want to be associated with Dave McClure and 500 US.
Right. The LPs held back the money, and those folks basically became panache. A bunch of those folks effectively became panache. They're like, we still want to do VC. We can't do it in this way. How do we do it?
So to have John Stokes, who is a co-founder of the fund, now the managing partner, very frankly tell BetaKit when we broke the story that they were pausing this. I don't know how to say it was notable, but I kind of stood straight up when I saw what Josh was filing from his interview.
Yeah, he also said in the story, if I'm not mistaken, he was just like, yeah, some LPs had questions. So what you said in the story was, according to Stokes, some prospective LPs have had a few concerns about Real Ventures, its personnel changes, the cash generation, performance of its past funds. That is interesting to sort of share that. Mm-hmm. I've never heard that before. I mean, it's honest, clearly, which is cool, but I've never heard anyone say that out loud.
Well, yes, from the firm. So our story last year, when we pointed to the new leadership under Janet, we had, as I think carefully and respectfully as we could, noted that this was a deeply entrenched Montreal-based, long-standing Quebec heritage fund that was now being run out of Toronto, and was adding new partners from Toronto to replace departing co-founding partners and among others. So there was, I think, concerns there over the cultural barrier. But then, I just read through the list. Element AI, Breather, Frank and Oak, Hubba. That's what we had last year. Things were not going good in terms of fund performance. And that was relative to the rest of the ecosystem, like the low performing bar. Now, across the band, tech has kind of gone into the toilet. I'm not saying all of their portfolio companies, and they've said things like things are performing better. You can point to how Saunders doing, Clearco, League, Xanadu's doing crazy stuff, but not a great time to looking to be closing in the best of circumstances.
No, I mean, to be fair, it's like Breather. I mean, I know Saunders the side of the same coin, but Breather's kind of tough in this economy. Frank and Oak, retail, physical retail, and digital retail, that's kind of tough. So those are unfortunate portfolio companies in that time. But it does hearken me back to some of the episodes we've had in the last 6 months, where not even the 3 months since the economy started turning, I'm thinking of Anthony Mushanta from RBCX, who was kind of like, or even the one we did with Damien Steele, where he sort of predicted this, right? He's like, it's starting in the public markets, but you're going to see some early stage ventures struggling, early stage venture firms struggling. And if you were struggling before, it's certainly
if you are not
extra
banked,
hard.
Yeah, if you're not backed by a bank or a huge retirement fund, maybe that's going to be, or the government. Yeah. It's going to be difficult for you. And I think I don't know what comes next for real, but I am not optimistic that it's good news. And I don't think that their AGM, which was the day that we broke the story, was a great day for the team.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's definitely going to be one to watch. But I'm curious, Douglas, and this is sort of a corollary question. What's next for Janet Bannister? She's been a fixture in the ecosystem for quite a while.
Yeah. Okay. So this was kind of the follow-up question that came from the story. Although I'll have some additional context, which might get a little weird for people, but please trust me that I'm giving you the straight goods here. So as part of this announcement, Janet isn't technically departing the fund. She's going to part-time. She'll be managing kind of her existing portfolio and board seats, but she's not going to be active in any new investments, which, hey, they don't have a fund anyways. She did say that she has no plans to leave Real anytime soon when Josh asked her, but there are some additional considerations here. One being the extended holiday that she took over most of the summer, which was, I think, one of the signals to people that something might be going on. Obviously, everyone is due their time off, and it's been a particularly busy couple of years, but it was a pretty extensive multi-month sabbatical at a time in which ostensibly, Real is either raising this fund or potentially pausing it so that their numbers improve so that they can go back to their LPs. I would say, though, that some of the statements that Janet made to us and then following it Elevate point to other things that I feel like we have to discuss. So she told BetaKit, the fact that we have not yet closed a fund gave me the opportunity to reflect on how I would like to have impact over the next 10 to 15 years. And at Elevate for the Women in Tech stage, she said, after spending a lot of time reflecting, I made the decision that I want to do something more innovative, more creative. I'm excited to have the time and the space to explore that. The Globe and Mail, which closely followed our
it's
story.
A local newspaper if you're not.
Local,
you might not have
rag,
heard of them. Yeah.
Globe and Mail, Sean Silkoff, he's a junior reporter there that you've heard on this podcast every once in a while. He had a pretty Janet-focused story that was chasing ours and effectively said that she was departing the fund. Now, she's explicitly made statements that she's there in some form and fashion. But I have to point to these comments that were made as not one of someone who's like, hey, I'm taking a step back to spend more time with my kids. She's literally saying that we didn't close a fund. That gave me time to reflect, which I took over the summer. And I've thought about what I want to do for the next 10 to 15 years. And that she's excited to do something more innovative, more creative. So a couple things here. And I'm going to start with this. This is going to sound super weird. I had a dream in early August that I was being told from the ecosystem that Janet Bannister was not just on sabbatical, but that she was working. This was part of her departure from the firm. It was one of those dreams that's like super specific and you're kind of like, why am I dreaming about work in my dream? But hey, this is the life I lead. I've accepted it. I sent this out to a couple of VCs that I know saying, mostly some of the ones that were coming to me asking, hey, is Real done? And I was told that was probably unlikely. And it was more likely that they're just pausing the fundraising until things turned up and it was going to be easier to close. And I was told specifically that people on the Real Ventures team have actively turned down roles at other places. So if she were to depart,
to stay with her, to stay
at Real.
She would be there, and they wanted to work with her. Is that the idea?
To work with her, or they were just committed to
the fund,
to the fund and what they were trying to do, right?
Sorry.
And I was told if she is pulling that stunt, she's quote pretty freaking evil.
And sorry, the stunt is taking a vacation, but not really taking a vacation.
Well, I think it's a long-standing tradition of most employees before they go out, they take all their vacation and leave and then depart. Now, again, I'm making no judgments on how this went down, but I think the point stands that there are people who have stayed at that fund. We've been told and turned down other offers to stick with it. So then to find out this week in dramatic fashion that certain changes are being made is pretty significant. And I would say, not everyone has stuck around. We broke the news that Isaac Suine had left Real to join Pender Ventures. I want to refer back to what I said before, that there were probably some LP commitments who were committed to the new fund because of Janet, because as the Globe story noted, as we've noted, she's very well respected in the ecosystem, particularly in Ontario, and that possibly some of the issues were Quebec-based in closing the fund, as well as the performance stuff, which John Stokes noted. With her gone, I'm wondering where those commitments stand. And I think I have to note that some of the statements that she made here at Elevate were, sitting next to or on stage with Michelle Scarborough from BDC, who is now running $500 million program for not only women-led ventures, but women-led venture investors.
Yes. So let's, segue to that.
Well, I just want to say I am not reporting anything in terms of what I would know. I am just saying I've had dreams. Dreams have turned out to be true. And the statements that Jenna specifically made, both to us and on stage at Elevate, indicate someone who isn't just stepping back from Real, but is stepping back from Real in some form or format and considering her next step. I would also note that if Real had a lot of difficulty fundraising, particularly in the early stage, wasn't the timing of the thing we're going to talk about next when it comes to early stage investments would have been well coinciding, right? So
yeah,
pointing to the question of is Real done, I feel like there have been some body blows suffered over the course of the summer and particularly this week. But I guess let's go to
what a juxtaposition. Yeah. And then the other thing that I think that was maybe one of the most inside baseball parts of the episodes we've done on this podcast. But let's juxtapose it.
Well,
Douglas.
So no, just because there are going to be people that are I'm expecting people to be very upset at me when they listen to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I want to note that we've been reporting on this since last year. We've been working on this story. And what I'm specifically calling out here, other than the statements that I've received from anonymous VCs, I'm not going to name, because I think that was a personal reflection of like a hypothetical scenario, which early August, based upon my dream logic, had not come to fruition. I'm specifically pointing to the statements that she made to both BetaKit and on stage at Elevate. The fact that we have not yet closed the fund gave me the opportunity to reflect on how I would like to have impact over the next 10 to 15 years, and that she made the decision to do something more innovative, more creative, and that she's excited to have the time and space to explore that. And that she said that at a Women in Tech focused event the day after, Rob, what was announced.
Apparently, if you have not been, if you're in this ecosystem, you haven't noticed, I think BetaKit posted the story the same day, actually.
Yep. Same day. I can't believe all this happened the same day. We actually ran this story about an hour before we broke the real story.
Yes. So again, to juxtapose the stories, the good news here, I think, is BDC committed $500 million to women-led ventures. This is on top of what they're already doing and investment. So Douglas, do you want to kind of maybe break it down, because it's not straight a $500 million check. What are they going to do with it?
It's actually, we saw it at Elevate in person. It's one giant oversized check, which we actually used as the tent for our fintech stage.
That's pretty cool. So it got wet.
Yeah, got very wet.
So it's
you got to stay liquid.
$50 million now.
It's important. The capital just has to keep flowing. Okay, so for context, if you are not familiar with the BDC Women in Tech Fund, it was launched in 2017. with a $200 million commitment led by Michelle Scarborough. We had talked about that several times on the previous iteration of this podcast, mostly because for a couple of reasons. At that time, it was a little unclear the qualifications for women-led investments because these weren't necessarily women-founded companies. They were women-led, so that's co-founder, executive team, or like important key players, which were not well defined at the time or defined at all. We actually happened to have Michelle on shortly after to talk through some hypothetical scenarios as to who could receive investment or not. We really appreciated that. Still wasn't super defined at that time, but they have deployed fully through $200 million worth of capital in women-led investments. The announcement yesterday for the Thrive platform, which is the evolution of this program, has 3 pillars. So an extra $300 million in fresh capital for women-led companies, but no longer just really at the A and B, also, importantly, at the seed level. Keep note of that. $100 million for a lab program, which is currently not very defined. The announcement actually said more details to come, but I believe this is a program to cast a wider net for non-traditional VC-backed women-led ventures, which I think, given BDC, not just like BDC venture capital division's broad mandate, is a great connection as, again, someone who runs a non-venture backable business. And then crucially, $100 million for indirect investment in women-led venture firms. So this is some fun stuff. Notably, by comparison, again, I believe, was this Josh as well? Man, did he have a week?
He's still awake.
By point of comparison, I think he's playing hockey tonight. He's just like, I just need to get on the ice. This $500 million is actually more than the $450 million that was committed to what may or may not be the last ever Vicky, depending upon who you ask. So while, again, VCCI is fund-to-fund commitments and to be matching, this is a mix. But just in terms of size and scope, $500 million. That's a lot of money. Many of the people that we spoke to at Elevate who are hearing the news just around the ecosystem, very excited by the commitment, but then maybe expressing some of the same concerns about this. And then we can maybe dig into those concerns. But just to lay this out, again, one of the most prominent women VCs in Canadian tech announced her stepping back as managing partner of a notable early stage firm on the same day that BDC yes-anded their Women in Tech Fund to the tune of $500 million and are very much staffing up as a requirement to run that, because not only do they increase the amount of capital that they'd be deploying in terms of direct investments, they're running 2 other different programs. Again, I'm not reporting anything here. I am just trying to place interesting pieces of information beside each other on the record, recorded for future use.
It's worth noting that I also am looking for opportunities, and I am not a woman, just by coincidence.
Do we want to 40-year-old founder this and maybe talk about women-led ventures? Technically, I think the company that you're working on might qualify.
Technically, actually, yes. My co-founder, and maybe this conflicts me out of the conversation, is a woman. My co-founder is female.
Yeah. So disclosure, please, listeners, do not hold any of the statements we're about to make against Rob's nascent company.
The fact that I totally love everything that they're doing. And
yeah. But so this is
I have a question.
deal,
I have a question,
right?
Douglas, and
Go ahead.
You may not know the answer to this.
Well, probably not.
Where did this money come from?
From the magic of the BDC.
It's not a trivial amount of money. Was this part of was this a VCCI bucket that was sitting around? Do you happen to know?
I think so. And some of this stuff is a little confusing, the relationship, because again, this is being announced through the ministry, but then it's activated through BDC. So again, there are certain things that BDC manages, and then there are its own capital line items. I believe this is more of the latter, right? So while BDC is more on like the investment committee making determinations as to where VCCI money goes, this is more in-house. Now, I say in-house, we should note that over the past couple of years, BDC has had a history of spinning out its internal funds, whether it be Framework or Amplitude. Usually they get funky names when they get spun out. Usually they include prior BDC VCs, and BDC says, hey, we'll be your anchor investor. Go raise a bunch more money, take this out, and then they get a fun name. Should note here that the Women in Tech Fund is now called the Thrive platform, which they're calling one of the first of its kind. Again, it's a multi-phase thing, but it's interesting to me that this thing has a label on it already, which is cool branding. But are more spinouts coming?
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So again, open questions, not a lot of details.
It's early days,
yes.
as just like it was the last time. It's early days, and then you have to figure out and define these things and articulate them. But basically, if you're women-led, you're eligible. Is that basically the TLDR on this?
Yes.
For something in this bucket?
So this is coming directly from the press release. The allocation builds upon BDC Capital's leadership on DEI standards and impactful results to date, with 43% of fund investment teams' active portfolio invested in funds that are women-led or co-led, or that have women in partner-level roles, which is double the Canadian average. That's related to the indirect investment envelope, which again, to be invested by BDC Capital's fund investment team, true fund of fund stuff. But they're noting specifically funds that are women-led or co-led, or that have women in partner-level roles, which is very similar to the verbiage for the direct investment criteria, which we talked about in CanCon episode whatever in like 2018. Yes. Again, Real Ventures would qualify for this financing.
Interesting.
Well, I guess would have. I'm not sure if her as a partner in part-time would still qualify there, but they've paused fundraising. And again, this is not to make this too dramatic or too tense. We're trying to thread a lot of needles here, both upon what we've reported. And again, there's tons of excitement in the space here. I didn't really find many women in the ecosystem who weren't super hyped by this. It is a major commitment. It is an opportunity to finance more women-led initiatives. I'm very interested to see how the indirect investment stuff's going to play out, because aren't we always talking about how there aren't enough women VCs? So is there going to be, I won't name names, but I had some people in the space just being like, I'll go be a GP. I'll be a GP to invest in other women, with the mentality that like, I will deploy capital to make things happen. And I'll just say right now, makes certain long-standing traditional VCs in our space, generally white guys above a certain age, very uncomfortable, because there is hey, you need to have deal experience before you can really call yourself a VC. So I expect more attention to come as this is deployed, rolled out, implemented. And if you thought Vicky was a absolute inside baseball shit fit, I don't expect it to stop with this, but I think we just have to note the size and the scale of BDC's commitments to trying to change the dynamics of our ecosystem in a pretty significant way. And I think what we should do to close this off, lest the two white guys on this podcast right now recording late in the evening at the end of Elevate get ourselves absolutely fucking murdered, would be to have Michelle Scarborough back on the podcast and talk through all of this. I think there's a lot here, and our listeners would really enjoy hearing about it.
Totally. It's literally a point in time, and these are both very fast changing, significant stories.
Yes, but I would say, hey, with these two stories, the landscape of venture in Canada changed pretty quickly.
And it's still clearly in the process of changing. And when we talked about the budget, that wasn't that long ago, and look at how much has changed. Yeah, that's juicy, Douglas. Do we have any other?
Oh, I've actually got some breaking news for you right here, Rob.
What's that?
Our friends at SaaS North are reconnecting the SaaS ecosystem on November 16th to 17th in sunny Ottawa, which means that Canada's largest in-person community of SaaS execs is on the horizon. Elevate, old news. New hotness, SaaS North. Early bird tickets are available right now until October 13th, and for an additional 20% off your ticket, you can use the code BetaKit20. Head over to saasnorth.com/register to get your tickets today, and stay tuned for some really exciting announcements of integrations between BetaKit and SaaS North. As you know, last year, the BetaKit keynote stage really rocked things. We were all over that with some really great panels, fireside chats. You might see some more podcast stuff at SaaS North, so stay tuned. But for now, head to saasnorth.com/register using the code BetaKit20 to get that sweet, sweet hookup. All right, Rob. I think we need to flip the script here. I am exhausted trying to matrix dodge my way through innuendo, reporting, and dreams I've had to not upset every VC and or woman in this ecosystem potentially. So I'm gonna hit you with the questions. And this was another one submitted to us. Again, I think probably following not only our reporting, but BetaKit programmed the fintech stage, the money stage at Elevate, where we were very lucky to have friends of the pod, Senator Colin Deacon, Mohammed from Manzel, a bunch of others, but also Abraham Takjian, the open banking lead, to talk about Canada's pathway to open banking. And I think the first answer, or the first question we got back to our AMA call for questions was, is open banking going to make its deadlines? Which I don't know is a reflection of someone who missed our panel or who attended it and has thoughts. So Rob, why don't you tell me if open banking is going to make its deadlines?
I'm going to put my prognostication hat on. Okay, so again,
what have you dreamed about open banking in the last
question,
6 months?
Complicated answer. And I thought, like, we talked about this before show. It's like we're talking about open banking a lot, but this is maybe an opportunity as you're falling asleep to kind of unpack it a little bit more and give you the context. So the TLDR, in my opinion, is it depends on what you mean by late.
Okay.
But maybe a little bit of context about the open banking, like what's actually happening, because I think we talk about it with Handwave and all the things about open banking, but we don't actually talk about what's actually happening, like the working that's actually happening. So here's what's actually happening. I have this on good authority. So basically, ultimately, the whole thing started, like the whole thing took a long time. If you remember, we talked about that on this show, I think with Senator Deacon, where it's like if not him, then somebody, where we talked about the fact that, hey, the election, we're ready to go with open banking, but we're just going to put that on a shelf right now because there's an election.
Oh, yeah. We literally had people, I thought we were writing about the glacial pace and people being like, I think Senator Deacon was like, we got to get the open banking lead named. We can do this. Most positive person in Canada, Senator Colin Deacon, friend of the podcast.
And so, so the initial, like the whole delay around the process was a combination of that. So waiting for the mandate, that to find the person, they had to get them acclimatized, and then they had to figure out, okay, so what do we actually need to figure out? So that probably delayed everything by a calendar year.
Yeah, because so the expectation of the advisory report, which dropped in April of 2021, but wasn't released by the government until August, was expecting a January 1 start date. Obviously, that didn't happen, and Abraham Takjian was named the open banking lead in effectively for April 1st of this year, which put everything back quite a ways.
Mm-hmm. So, by the way, there was a pandemic, in case we forgot.
Also, that was the pandemic slowed things down.
Election, pandemic, all those things. So, what's actually happening is there's four, I don't know if they're called working groups or groups that are the four topic areas that are being focused on in open banking. There's privacy and consent, accreditation, liability, and security. Privacy and consent is interesting because I think there's a great BetaKit story, which we're going to talk about a couple times here, but there's a privacy bill that's being tabled right now. So this is basically like privacy and consent. Do you, as a consumer of fintech products, know what you're consenting to, who you're giving your information to, and what information are you giving? And Quebec already has a law. I forget the exact number. It's GDPR-esque, and Bill C-27 is a federal version of something like that. So that's not going to be finished by the time. I think they're hoping to have these working groups, the framework of what open banking is going to be resolved by the end of this calendar year, and apparently that's on track. There's accreditation, like not only like are you do you actually meet the standards of being able to transact on this network, but are you like actually a legitimate entity that should be transacting in the financial services ecosystem? Liabilities should be obvious, but like who takes the risk if some scam happens at the moment? Like, is it the financial institution? Is it the fintech? Is it you? And security should be the most obvious. Is this secure end to end? And we've talked about that a lot in this podcast. The one thing that I think there's a fantastic BetaKit story from, I guess, a few weeks ago.
Right after Kelsey. Labor Day, we dropped that sucker.
It's a big one. It's a doozy, but it brings up a really fantastic point, which is governance. Given the ecosystem that we are in, sometimes there's trust issues between parties. It's not clear who's going to govern this whole thing. So execution will happen. Who's going to govern it? And Abraham has said, the open banking lead, that's not in his mandate. It's not his jurisdiction. But the problem is it's nobody's mandate or jurisdiction at the moment.
Well, he said it's not in his jurisdiction, but he also said on stage and previously that he's following the advisory report as his roadmap. And we had a member of that advisory committee on stage with us speaking pretty openly about like something has to be done to allow for the system to be up and running. Now, initially that was going to be January 2023. When the report was dropped, but obviously the delays in the report being received and things being started with Abraham not being named, like basically we're like 9 months behind. So Abraham is done as open banking lead September of 2023, which is basically the 18-month window of work to get all of this stuff done, which then is only phase one. This isn't all of open banking. This is just the basic standards plus read access accreditation. It's not even right. Your fintechs aren't going to be able to update your stuff. They're just going to be able to legally scrape your data.
Everyone can build their own mint.
Yes.
No problems.
Basically.
So yeah, so that my understanding is my take was the same, which is like, since it's delayed, the work will be done once the frameworks are complete, which seem to be on track. And it'll take, according to Abraham, like something like 9 to 18 months to get the thing done. Specifically, though, my understanding is he committed that in Q3 of 2023, so right around the time his mandate ends, there will be something to test against.
Yes. So this leads to the question, so were you in the actual audience yesterday for this conversation?
No, not that one. I'm sorry.
That makes sense because we were overflowing by maybe 50 to 100 people. So crazy. Very few people were in the audience. There was a lot of people standing outside and just watching, which
it's true because out into the street.
Yes, actually. There was overflow for an open banking fintech conversation. Is pretty exciting, but as a programmer, it was also very depressing. We're going to work on getting the actual audio from that session, and we might we'll certainly publish it on BetaKit. We might actually put it up on the podcast. But I will say, the number one question that I received in prep for the conversation that I moderated was the question of governance. And I think it relates to not only the fact that the working groups haven't really touched both governance as a question, as well as the technical standards for this thing, but they're also worried that something's going to be ready for September 2023. But what is it going to look like? And if it's not good enough, if it doesn't define equity between the incumbents and the potential disruptors to have equal access, what arbitration looks like when it comes to what if the bank just decides not to give the information to the fintech? How does that work? That they're fintech companies in this ecosystem are going to be left holding the bag because the version 1.0 of open banking will not be enough to move things forward.
The only other thing that's worth mentioning is, minority governments in Canada don't tend to last for large amounts of time. That's not casting aspersions on any one government. It's just that's
a thing that happens.
Common pattern. And the Conservatives have a new leader, and a year away is a long time. in the universe. So it will be interesting to see that even if we get some form of traction, what a new government may change in the terms of what they think is fair and right.
Because all throughout this process, in this 18-month period, the government's on the hook to identify and address any regulatory or legislative impediments and to formulate elements of the open banking framework. So that's, I think, a lot of the privacy stuff that you were talking about previously, as well as other considerations. But then after that 18-month window, they have to facilitate legislation or regulations. They got to make this happen. And that's a long time away. There are governments, our political landscape is ever shifting. Let's put it that way. And I think, the tension, I have to say, my intention for the interview with Abraham was to be like, pulling no punches. We've been reporting on this since Jump Street. Our readership is very interested. I am not going to let you off the hook for any answers. And about halfway through the conversation, when the other panelists were kind of yelling about this process, what's left behind, and the audience was getting a little, it was very warm testy in the tent. They were getting a little testy. I'm just like, I kind of have to feel that we have to balance out the responsibilities that this one person has versus the things that are or not in their control. I will say, Abraham was very clear that he is confident that they're going to make the timelines to deliver something. And I think a lot of people in that room, in that tent that day, are still really concerned about what that something looks like. So maybe to answer the question, is open banking going to make its deadlines? I think it will. I don't think Abraham Tokjian is the type of person that hands in his homework late, but there are different grades to homework, and he's not in the class next semester. He graduates, and fintechs will be left with what's ever left. So TBD. But please look forward. We're going to get the audio, the video, or something from that conversation because
or a reenactment. We're going to have to
get the transcript.
Have the script.
It was intense and actors. Literally intense. Jeez, I can't believe I went there. This is another Thursday night super late after a tech conference.
Giddy, yeah.
Okay, maybe let's end this on a fun one. And this is kind of something that we talked about for our last kind of conference AMA with Collision. Any Elevate standouts? I was obviously involved with programming 2 of the stages, the AI and the FinTech stage. BetaKit as a team was all over the place, not only breaking news from the venue, but we were moderating a bunch of the sessions. Rob, 40-year-old founder, you were there as an attendee. You're there to learn and to network. I saw you in person for the first time in years at a 111 event.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
What stood out to you from Elevate? Any highlights?
I think two things, and they're sort of like feels more than specific facts.
I like feels.
I think like one was it feels like it's nice to see the conference. I mean, maybe this is just me going back to conferences, but it's nice to see the conference evolve. It's bigger. They closed off some streets. There's more opportunity to sort of run into people and have conversations. And even if you're running to the next event, they even blocked off a park, which was kind of cool. So it was the
much more
conference itself,
festively for sure.
Yeah, and there was lots of good speakers, lots of different places to go. You got some exercise in, so that was kind of cool. And then also, it really did a good job of. It brought a really interesting cross section of the tech ecosystem, the Canadian innovation ecosystem. I mean, there was a lot of incumbents and innovation sides of those incumbents there. There was a lot of entrepreneurs there, and a lot of investor types of all different shapes and sizes. So it was actually hard to get to events because I kept running into people like, I haven't seen you in 2 years. So it was the thing with Collision. It's so large, you probably are going to run into people, but probably people you don't necessarily know. Whereas this one, it's a little, not that it's small, but it's more
densely
on
Canadian,
target.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really that juxtaposition of good programming, good layout, good people. It was a really enjoyable thing.
Anything content-wise that you were seeking out?
Well, since I'm like a polymath in terms of my interest, it was I made Vass's talk on competition.
Oh, I happen to be wearing my hashtag Free Boswell
t-shirt
shirt right now.
Yep. And I I did pop in just to see whether Josh said the same things he said on our podcast.
Oh, Josh O'Kane, Globe and Mail.
Josh O'Kane on the sidewalk
reporter for that
story.
Local rag.
Small, the little newspaper. That was an interesting one because I thought, interestingly about that panel, nobody there clearly was from Sidewalk. It was all people who were Waterfront Toronto, which was kind of cool. A privacy lawyer, I think she must have had something to do with it, and then a community advocate. But there was nobody advocating on behalf of Sidewalk, which I completely understand.
You might have seen those people quoted or perhaps not quoted in Josh's book.
Yeah, so I mean, it would have been cool to have somebody who had that perspective on it, but of course, I can understand why that wasn't the case.
No one works at Sidewalk anymore.
That's right.
Okay, well, so obviously for me, this is another one of those things where. And people are always maybe not surprised by this, but they don't understand it. Like when you work in the media, you don't really get to attend or experience tech conferences or festivals.
Especially if you're programming the thing.
Well, but even at Collision, I spent 3 days sitting in the media area the whole time, anchored myself to the desk to facilitate the rest of my team doing what they needed to do across the conference. This one was obviously different because not only did we program 2 stages, we had a pretty strong commitment to stage presence. So I moderated 3 sessions, 2 on the fintech stage, 1 on the main stage, and Megan moderated 1 on the AI stage. So I didn't actually talk to anyone without a microphone until about 4:00 on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. All the while working a little bit in the media room as we were breaking the Real Venture story, which was its own consideration. It's why you will see a write-up from BetaKit on the AI stage and not one on the fintech stage, sadly, because we pulled Josh off that stage to finish up that story. So my highlight of this kind of probably comes as a programmer, and there's a lot of tracks I could take here. I think we've been talking about open banking a lot. We were one of the first publications to report that Abraham Tokjian was being named open banking lead. You just highlighted the most recent open banking story that we busted open with a variety of little scooplets in it. We've been all over this story since about, if I look back at the timeline I made for my panel, open banking review was first identified in budget 2018. So we're almost at Sidewalk levels of history here. Obviously having Senator Deakin, friend of the pod, moderate a panel with a variety of the fintech startups we've had on this podcast talking about equity for Canadians and improving competition and innovation. Having people show up to see someone from the Competition Bureau on stage in a fireside and be really lean forward into it, like overflowing a stage that's a fintech stage that had very little crypto and it was all about competition and innovation was exciting. But all of that is an absolute lie. The thing that most excited me was the fact that we were able to book a member of the Toronto Raptors front office who was responsible for strategy and data insights to talk about how the Raptors use that to be, not only to become world champions, but to one day hopefully repeat again. Which, as you'll note, from 2019 in Elevate when we programmed the fintech stage and we had Masai Ujiri and the actual Raptor on our stage, I look for any opportunity to bring my personal interest into my professional business. This one was pretty awesome, not only for the content and actually tying it in thematically to the stage, talking about like actually data insights analysis and how the Raptors use that in sports.
Give me an example. I'd love to know, like, I did not see that. So what's an example?
I would say the best example, which you can read on The Athletic, one Eric Corrine, who's probably one of the best Raptors beat reporters, wrote up a story. Keith from the Raptors described the process of experiencing Kawhi's series-winning shot against the Philadelphia 76ers in person, but also broke down the numbers because through the tools that they used, they were able to quantify the odds of that shot going in. And they had it at 13%, which is
no way.
A very lucky number. Now, interestingly, they had it at 13% because of Kawhi. A similar shot of that nature might have been more like 10%, which, hey, doesn't seem like that significant of an increase, but you have to remember that's like a 30% increase.
Yeah. And still low probability.
Yes. Kawhi increased the odds by 30% on a miracle shot. So I will suggest just having that happen on stage, giving something that was fun and interesting and connected people to how AI and data insights like impact our lives. Like the whole stage day was about that. But to get a little bit of Raptors in there and to have a reporter from The Athletic, which is owned by the New York Times, write a story about it is definitely a career highlight. We will link to that in the show notes on BetaKit. I suggest you read it. If you were unable to make that stage, it's a great read. Absolutely, definitely a highlight for me.
That's awesome.
We're so much. This is great. We're so positive.
Yes.
Ended this on a high note. Talking about, I feel like our collision AMA was like us 4 octaves lower than our normal voice.
That's right.
Basically broken as human beings.
I still think these questions are getting so hard that some of them are scary. So I'm like, the next AMA, I'm like, I'm going to have to get my PhD.
I feel like our listeners are evolving past us at a speed that we cannot compete with.
I need an AI to read the stories so that they can tell me the...
And again, the first question was one that we've been asked all summer. And we broke news about it, and I still struggled to answer it. And I had dreams about it. So I don't know where we can go from here, except perhaps, teaser, next month. Maybe the only way to win is to fight back on our own terms. Perhaps doing a live AMA streamed across BetaKit's social media channels. Maybe we hit them where it hurts. No more DMs sliding in with questions we can't answer. Maybe we fight back across LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter all at once, perhaps with special guests. And then November, we already told you, SAS North, what perhaps could we do in Ottawa in November for SAS North? Well, you're just going to have to stay tuned. $500 million for women in Canadian tech. Pretty cool. The BetaKit Podcast is produced by BetaKit Incorporated. It's edited by Katie Lohr, and its hosts are Rob Kennedy and me, Douglas Saltis. To learn more about how you can support this podcast, head to patreon.com/BetaKit.